fire was hot, intense, and burning fiercely when the first firefighters arrived on the scene just after 3 this morning. Walls and sections of roof collapsed several times during the fire. Despite the obvious danger, firefighters entered. It's standard tactics.
The only way you can put a fire out is to put water on the fire. And if the fire's in the building, you have to get inside and put the water on. So it's pretty common practice, I think, in all aggressive fire departments that you fight a fire from the interior.
The first reports of the death of Everett firefighter Gary Parks indicated that he was hit by falling beams when the roof collapsed. Everett's fire chief says that wasn't the case.
We do know that they were low on air and that they were forced out of the building by the fire going over the top of them and behind them. So there was about 6 of them in the building.
Blinded by thick smoke, the other firefighters, with their air packs exhausted or nearly so, followed hoses as the superheated smoke burst into flames over their heads. 3 other firefighters were overcome by smoke during the escape. One is being treated with concentrated oxygen in the hyperbaric chamber at Virginia Mason Hospital. The other 2 injured firefighters were treated and released. The community college president says definitely no classes tomorrow, and they'll have to wait till late tomorrow afternoon to make a determination about Wednesday's classes. In Everett, Roger Gadley, Cairo Eyewitness News.
Well, Seattle firefighters had troubles of their own this morning. What apparently started out as a dumpster fire near the Kingdome turned into a difficult warehouse blaze shortly after midnight. Thick smoke and high winds kept fire crews working on this one for more than an hour. One firefighter suffered minor burns, and damage to the building tops $300,000. No word yet on the cause.
From King 5 in Seattle, Don Porter with Jeff Renner, weather, and Tony Ventrella, sports. This is King 5 News.
Good evening. For many of us, it's the end of a 3-day holiday weekend. Tomorrow, back to business as usual. Not so at Everett Community College, where students, staff, and neighbors are still stunned at the heavy toll taken by the 3-alarm fire that broke out on campus early this morning. Federal arson squads are helping in this investigation, but no one knows yet how the fire got started. The blaze killed an Everett firefighter, hospitalized 3 others. College officials say the damage in dollars will run into the millions. Flames destroyed the student center, the cafeteria, and the school's library. From Everett tonight, Glenn Farley reports on the struggle to face up to this loss.
After work tonight, a lot of Everett folks came down to see what all the fuss had been about. They were amazed and stunned. You got 3 reports pending right now?
Yes, I do. 2 for one class and 1 for another one, so I'll have to go down and try and get down at the library downtown. So, I don't know.
The head of the library had come down earlier in the day. His library, the repository of history since the late 1940s, lay in ruins.
Almost need to rumble through it a little bit, and of course that won't be possible for a couple of days, but it looks like it's a total washout.
The card catalog. Bookshelves. 48,000 volumes of history, science, mathematics, and the rest are gone. Tomorrow morning, the heads of Everett's other public and college libraries will get together to try and coordinate places where students can both research and study, to try and give back part of what was lost here today. In Everett, Glenn Farley, King 5 News.
48-year-old Gary Parks, a 19-year veteran of the Everett Fire Department, was one of several firefighters trapped inside one of the burning buildings by a sudden flash of flame. Everyone but Gary Parks managed to crawl to safety. Parks is the first Everett firefighter to die in the line of duty in more than 60 years. Linda Byron reports on the shock of Parks' loss to those who knew him, worked with him, and loved him.
It was a scene from Kathy Parks' worst dreams, one she had often prayed would never become reality.
They told me that there'd been a big fire in the Garrison Hospital. So they said, don't even get dressed. This is what I was wearing. Just, you know, just come with us. And so we put the siren on, the lights on, and went into the hospital as fast as we could. And then I found out that in fact, had been killed in the accident.
She had known this day might come.
It's just that it's just a reality. It could happen. It's one of the, you know, it's the most dangerous occupation, and just he loved the fire department, and so, you know, that's what he was there for.
Gary Parks joined the Everett Fire Department 18 years ago at the age of 30. Today, the fire department flew its flag at half-mast in honor of the co-worker and friend who'd been lost. While the firefighters were inside the burning building, Parks reportedly helped out a friend by sharing his oxygen. But when the others followed a fire hose to the outside and safety, Parks wasn't with them. Fellow firefighters say Parks was one of the best. His job was to drive the truck and operate the pumps, but he frequently fought on the line with the other men.
He knew what he was doing. He's a good driver. Spent a lot of time, I don't know how many years, but 18 or something. He knew what he was doing. He was willing to help the young guys. I'm one of the younger guys.
Someone you looked up to?
Foxy, yeah.
His children and wife say they look at his death as a terrible accident. But they say it was no accident. Gary Parks died while helping others.
He saved someone else, and that's what, it's what I would have done. It's what all of us would have done, because we're unselfish people. And for him to give someone else a breath of air before he could get out, I'm really proud of him for that.
Good evening, I'm Mike James.
And I'm Jean Anderson.
Just ahead on King 5 News tonight, arson is the cause. The devastating fire at Everett Community College this week was deliberately set.
Lockheed workers and management caught in a bitter labor disagreement for weeks go back to the bargaining table.
Meantime, another labor dispute out on the Seattle waterfront gets nasty in a pungent sort of way.
The Calgary Winter Olympics yet a year away, but if you're going, it's time to think of a place to stay. Part 4 in our week-long series by Lou Gellos.
And Tony's here. He'll talk about some crucial games in the Pac-10 race. And Jeff, he still likes the weekend weather.
All next on King 5 News.
From King 5 in Seattle, Gene Henderson and Mike James with Jeff Renner weather and Tony Ventrella sports. This is King 5 News.
Good afternoon again. Some sobering news tonight in that fatal fire at Everett Community College. A team of national investigators has concluded the fire was the work of an arsonist. King 5's Linda Byron has just returned from Everett Community College, where the announcement was made just a short time ago, and she's here now with more. Linda?
Gene, federal investigators say the evidence is clear. The fire that killed one firefighter and caused an estimated $8 to $10 million worth of damage was no accident. The possibility had been whispered from the beginning, but the news was hard to take. There was a collective gasp of surprise from the crowded room as investigators announced the results of their probe into the devastating fire.
The results are clear that the fire was in fact an arson.
Authorities say the fire started in the book return area of the library. While investigators say they were unable to locate the exact source of the fire, evidence at the scene clearly points to arson.
We uncovered a lot of the signs that we look for: charring, burn patterns, direction of fire, and we eliminated the other causes that I also had mentioned to many of you in interviews we did during the week. We did not have an electrical malfunction. We do not have gas, natural gas in the building, and we eliminated any cause other than someone setting a fire in that area on the floor level.
Authorities say they have several leads and have not developed any suspects. However, the investigation is being considered a homicide investigation as well as an arson probe.
We don't have a firefighter death here. We have actually the murder of a firefighter because we have a set fire.
Authorities say they have already interviewed numerous witnesses in the case, including campus employees and students and nearby residents. Officials say they expect the arson investigation to be long and difficult. They are asking anyone with information to contact the authorities. Jean?
So to recap, they have no suspect. They're asking help for suspects, and it had to be somebody inside, somebody with keys, in order to be inside the library.
Officials wouldn't answer any questions about whether there was any evidence of forced entry. However, the book return area of the library is not an area that a person could access from a window or even throw something into that area. Had to be someone inside the building.
And who handles it from here on out, if not ATF?
The federal team, the national response team of 13 who was brought in specially to investigate, is going home. Now it will be up to the Everett police and firefighters as well as a team of local ATF investigators,
So that's
a joint investigation.
That's where information ought to be directed.
That's right.
Linda, thank you.
Firefighter Gary Parks died in the flames of that library fire this week, and this morning in Everett, the city remembered Parks in a special memorial service. Larry Calley reports.
Firefighters, police officers! always find it. But he knew he sailed, he scooped.
When we're kids, I think we all want to be firefighters. I know I did. And we see firefighters on TV and they're heroes. And then Gary shows us that you're real life heroes.
Remember that big old heavy jukebox?
I've run through the scene a million times. I honestly don't see the face that gave me that one last breath of air that I needed to get out of there. In my heart, I know it was Gary.
Official line in service time. And he was always fun to be around.
Parksy, water was so much a part of your life, whether you drank it, swam in it, skied on it, sailed over it, pumped it, or sprayed it out of a hose. So many times you and water overcame the enemy of firemen. Now it only seems right that we give you to the water.
From Seattle, KOMO 4 News, 6:30 update.
And good evening. Thanks for joining us. Topping KOMO 4 News tonight, a fresh start for the Everett Community College investigation, as inspectors today began refocusing their effort to find the arsonist. KOMO 4 News has learned that the chief federal investigator today met with Everett police and fire officials to get an update. Although investigators are not publicly discussing it, here's what we know about the investigation. According to one source, there are many more potential suspects than previously thought, people with possible motive for setting the fire. That security at the library was loose, that most faculty and student council members had keys to the library, that almost anyone could have gotten in to set the fire, that several students and security guards have been given lie detector tests, and that some have failed those tests. They've also discovered that the arsonist stacked chairs and books inside the library to make a pile of flammable material to get the fire going. Even with that information, fire investigators admit that cracking the Everett arson may be difficult and that the longer it takes, the harder it gets.
Well, as the investigation continues, the Everett Fire Department and the community college are still picking up the pieces. KOMO's John Larson joins us now with details of that effort. John?
Well, Jim, it was 1 month ago tonight that they held the memorial service for Gary Parks, the firefighter that died in that fire. The college, of course, is struggling to rebuild. The Everett Fire Department is getting on with life with the memory of Gary Parks still very much alive.
Everett Community College suffered a $9 million loss. When classes resumed, students faced the skeleton of their burned-out library. With state help now, the school is hoping to rebuild. In a very different sense, the Everett Fire Department is rebuilding too. When firefighters responded that Sunday night, they never dreamed they would lose one of their own. Firefighter Gary Parks died in that blaze. Parks gave his last breath of bottled air to a fellow fireman. They were both trapped inside. Firefighter Sam Francimoni can talk about that now, the fear, the guilt. Sam was trapped inside the fire with Parks. Someone, probably Parks, saved his life.
Personally, I felt if I could get if I could get some air, I could get out. And that's why I called for help. And when I saw the mass come toward me, I felt with that one breath of air, I could get out. It happened so fast. Things started happening at an incredible rate of speed. And I remember the helmet coming off, because you got to take your helmet off to take the mask off. I remember the helmet coming off. I remember the arm reaching up, the helmet coming off, and the mask coming toward me with the arm. I remember putting it up and getting the air. It was cool, and it was, you know, it was right. And then my thought focused on getting out. And I remember handing the face mask back and seeing the person reach for it and seeing the person put it up to his face. I remember that, or seeing it go up. And then that was it. The situation was deteriorating very rapidly. Guys say that when we came out, there was fire rolling over our heads. I couldn't tell you.
They find Parks? No. When Sam learned that Gary was still inside, it set off a chain reaction of guilt and sorrow that other Everett firefighters felt too.
I felt really guilty. because I don't know if it was Gary that gave me the air that enabled me to get out there or not. I still don't. Like I said before, in my heart, I think he did.
Now, since that fire, Sam and many other Everett firemen involved have taken advantage of counseling offered the department. Sam says that the loss of Gary Parks, ironically, has brought many of the people in the department closer together.
Does Sam think the department itself has changed because of the loss?
Well, I think yes. It was always a good fire department, but he says there are some changes coming as a result of the fire. The department will receive its first emergency signals, electronic distress calls that automatically turn on if a firefighter stops moving, a sign that he's in trouble. And it will receive helmet radios so all firefighters can communicate while they're fighting a fire. Both devices could have saved Gary Parks.
Thanks, John.
You bet.
Tonight on Town Meeting, arsonists are at large in the Northwest, striking secretly at night, reducing buildings and sleeping households to charred rubble. To an arsonist, nothing is sacred. No one is safe. Tonight, find out how to protect yourself and what can be done to snuff out the devastating crime of arson. Ladies and gentlemen, the host of Town Meeting, Ken Shrink.
Okay, thank you very much. There is nothing that is more frightening than waking up in the middle of the night to the smell of smoke, the crackling of flames. The kids' bedrooms are down the hall. You are frantically working your way there. Your eyes are burning and your lungs are scorched from heat and smoke. Now, most people really can't imagine that happening to them. We all try to be careful. We have smoke detectors and we feel secure. But that means nothing to an arsonist. An arsonist doesn't care about you or your children, doesn't care where you live or how nice your house is. The arsonist is armed with fire, a deadly weapon that has Seattle area residents going to bed every night wondering if it is their home. That is going to be next. We have a man with us this evening, our first guest, who used to use fire as a weapon. He was convicted of setting several fires, served time in prison for that, has been out for 18 months or so. For obvious reasons, his identity will be protected this evening. John, are you there?
Yes.
Let me ask you, how did you go about setting these fires? Let's begin. Let's get right to it here.
Well, mainly, most of my fires were out of frustration. Money, drinking, women, anything. It was a way for me, instead of hitting the girlfriend, I'd just go out and start a fire.
So you just grab a pack of matches and what?
Start a fire, anything that was convenient.
Did you, had you selected places prior to when you went out? Did you have an idea in your mind where you were going to go and whether you were going to burn a house or a dumpster or a car or what?
Not really. It was just if my mood was bad, and especially back then I was drinking a lot, and when I get done after the bars closed, I'd be walking home and I'd just, out of anger, I'd start something.
So on a whim?
Yeah.
Did you ever stop and consider, did it ever enter your mind, either before or after, that somebody could be hurt, somebody could be killed by the fire you started?
Oh, yes, definitely after. I always, some of them I remembered, some I didn't. But I realized people were possibly getting hurt, but I was two different people. I was one person when I was sober, and I was one person when I was under the influence of alcohol.
So when you were under the influence of alcohol, you didn't care if somebody got killed or hurt?
Not really.
How did you set your fires? Did you use flammable liquids or trash or what? How would you set a fire?
With anything readily handy to me, it all depends on, well, one of them I recall there was this little can of acetone there, and I used that. It was just anything handy.
Where would you set your fires, more often than not?
Oh, some of them were in paper recycling stations. One was a tavern. Just any place where they couldn't see me, somebody could see me. I remember some parts of where I was doing it, I'd be conspicuous because for some reason I thought maybe I wanted to get caught. But
did the fires you set do a lot of damage?
Not
Well, not really, except for the tavern fire is the one that caused the most extensive damage.
What would you do after you got the fire started? What would you do? What happened then?
I would generally leave the area. I mean, I wasn't out for the sexual pleasure. It was just frustration and the way my life was going at the time. And I wouldn't stay around. I'd maybe come back the next day if I remembered where the place was at and see what happened. But I would not stay in the vicinity after I started the fire.
Why would you go back the next day? Was there a certain pride or something that you took in what you did, or what?
I couldn't really answer that question. It's just...
Well, there must have been something that you felt that drove you to go back there the next day. What was it?
Maybe to see what I did do. I don't know. I cannot really explain it right now. Not to this day.
How long were you in prison?
Almost 3 years.
Okay, and you've been out for 18 months now?
Yes.
And we assume that you haven't been setting any fires?
Oh, no.
But you have, well, you say, oh, no, as if, it's an impossible thing. You've certainly read or heard about the arson fires in the Seattle area here.
Oh, yes.
Got to ask you, what goes through your mind? Does this crank you up?
No.
Get you thinking, ooh.
No,
I'd like to go out and burn something down again.
No, not at all. I think it's, I have a complete attitude on it now where the person who's doing it is, looks like to me he's out more to hurt people than anything, because a lot of my places were unoccupied dwellings or...
But you still had firefighters who would rush there and put their lives on the line to put the fires out.
Oh, correct. Yes, but mine were no residences involved at all.
So you don't feel a sense of kinship with fellow arsonists? You don't feel inspired by what's happening right now in any way?
No. Whoever's doing it out there, I think, has a definite problem like I did at one time, and they need help.
Okay. At this point, we would like to introduce our next guest. He is recognized as one of the country's leading authorities on arson. He is from the National Fire Academy. Please join me in welcoming Tim May. Thanks for being here. How do you go about stopping somebody like John from setting fires?
Well, listening to John, it's not a unique situation to this area or to any part of the country. John's most important comment was he needs help, as any arsonist needs help. As far as how would I go about it, it's a community effort. No one in the Seattle area, no one in the audience is capable of helping an arsonist such as John by themselves. Some of the comments as I listen to John are again not unique. Arson, we need to understand a little bit about arson. Arson is a crime that excludes no one. We're all possible victims. In fact, we pay for arson daily, each and every one of us. Arson is also known to the investigator as a crime that takes very little guts, no guts. It's a coward. It's a person who's going to use a match instead of a gun or a knife. It's a person that does not want to face whomever or whatever they're angry. And it's so easy with fire. That's what makes it so tragic, that anyone is capable of committing these types of fires.
John is a serial arsonist. We've got another serial arsonist, at least one serial arsonist at work here in the Seattle area right now. Are they tough to catch? Is it tough to track down someone like that, or is it easier because they're at it so much?
Understanding arson is the hardest crime there is to catch, to convict, to prosecute. The national average is less than 2%. It's a crime that in the 60s and 70s no one wanted to handle. Police department said it's a crime the fire department should handle. The fire department said it's a crime, so the police department should handle. So no one touched arson. And then as the problem continued to grow, as it came into the limelight, if you will, that people realized that we're all victims of arson daily, that it's the most cancerous crime there is, always on the increase, killing and killing. Finally, there was a group effort or a task force effort. And because of the difficulties with the prosecution, with the evidence, Just because a fire occurs, you don't know if it's accidental or if it's incendiary.
How can you tell? You've led us to a good point here. You look at it, somebody goes into a room that's been destroyed by fire. How do you know if that's been deliberately set? How do you go about piecing together evidence that says this was deliberately set? Somebody did this on purpose.
That's probably one of the reasons it's so difficult to investigate. The trained investigator, once they arrive at a fire scene, begins it's a long duration. It's a task that they literally dig through the entire fire scene, because should it be incendiary or arson legally, that evidence has to be recovered, because that evidence then becomes used in the prosecution.
But what evidence can there be if somebody walks into the living room of a house, strikes a match, and sets the drapes on fire, and then leaves? I mean, what's the match isn't going to be left. How can you tell that maybe the drapes were near an electrical outlet? How can you tell it wasn't a short that ignited the drapes?
The point is an excellent point, and the nice thing about a trained fire investigator, there are ways. Fire physically destroys nothing. A fire that you see is a result of fire changing room configuration, furniture, and it just has a different appearance once it's burned. The trained investigator learns to recognize the change, understands the speed of fire, how fast, how hot, how fire normally should burn, room temperatures. And by seeing fires on a daily basis or weekly basis, they learn to gather an expertise in just looking at the fire scene. And this is part of their training. This is a difficult part. But one trained fire investigator is quite a piece of machinery.
I was surprised to learn this. Maybe some of the people here will be too. The United States has the highest incident of arson fires in the entire world. No other nation. Why is that? Why is the United States so susceptible to this type of crime?
I think the sad part goes along with the word fire. The United States is obviously the best educated, best equipped fire service in the world. We have the greatest firemen, fire equipment, fire laws. Everything is here for us to use. Unfortunately, we have a great lack of concern for fire. We find that a parent will teach their children how to tie their shoes, ride a bike, or blow bubbles with bubble gums. They'll spend more time doing that than they ever talk about fire. Fire, the American is completely unaware of fire.
Disregard for it.
Completely.
All right. It is quite likely that the people, the arsonists who are setting the fires in Seattle and Everett, are watching this program right now. When we come back, we will get a profile of those killers. Stay with us. Welcome back to Town Meeting. There are people at home who have got to be asking themselves, how can somebody go out and deliberately set a fire, purposely set something ablaze when you know there's a good possibility that someone could get hurt or someone could get killed? What are these people like? Well, our next guest can tell us that, or at least our next guest can give us a profile of what arsonists in general are like. Please join me in welcoming Dr. John Cochran, who is the senior forensic psychologist at Oregon State Hospital. Thanks for being here. Thank you. What can you tell us in general about the arsonist who's been working in the Seattle area here, who's already killed 2 people?
A person like this fits into the category of what would be known as a serial arsonist or a pyromaniac. Individuals like this are extremely passive-aggressive individuals. They're individuals who, if you go back and study their histories, have had a great deal of difficulty in interpersonal relationships.
Like what? You know, I hate my mother, or, I mean, is that what we're talking about?
Well, in terms of their mother figure, for example, what's happened is that usually they're raised in a family with a very dominant, overpowering mother figure. Often the father figure is absent, or if he is there, he's ineffectual in the family unit. Comes from a family unit often of fairly large numbers. Usually he's in the middle. He's a squashed middle child. In terms of his attachment with others, He's not able to form or bond attachments well at all with others. In other words, he tends to be cold and calculating. He tends to be very callous in his interpersonal relationships. Other things about the individual is that usually they're of low average intelligence. They're not able to achieve well in society. So, for example, in terms of jobs, we'll find records of a very marginal or uneven performance on the parts of these individuals. Another thing is in terms of their basic kind of motivations, and this sets them apart from other types of arsonists, you find that they get a great deal of excitement and power from these kinds of acts. And in many cases, they get what we call a sensual or even a sexual gratification to the point of reaching orgasm.
Now, are these, do they usually commit other crimes along when they're out there committing arson? Are they doing something else?
If you look in their backgrounds, often they have a criminal record of doing other kinds of crimes in the past as a juvenile on up through their adult life. These crimes could be burglaries, they could be rapes, they could be multiple arsons.
Their fascination with fire, if you were to socialize with a person who was an arsonist, would you be able to tell that? I mean, do they sit there and, you know, flick the Bic lighter and look at the flame? Do they light match after match? And
if they felt comfortable enough in a social situation, they might reveal certain things to people that they're around. No, they wouldn't do it like that around strangers. Usually they don't. They try to keep that dark part of themselves hidden. They know that, you know, people are looking for them. They know the consequence of those kinds of actions. They don't want to get apprehended.
John, let's bring you back into this. How does that profile that Dr. Cochran just explained fit you?
Well, the part he said about sexual gratification, that doesn't fit me at all because, like I said earlier, mine was just out of general frustration. Dr. Cochran was right about the relationships with women. I went through a few bad ones at the time doing my fires. I was in a relationship that wasn't going very well. So instead of seeing her at night, I'd go to the tavern, get plowed, and on my way home, I'd see something and just burn it.
Let me ask you a question. Would you tell us if you did get sexual gratification from this? Would you acknowledge that the profile that Dr. Cochran gave us was true, even if it were?
Well, like I said,
would you admit it?
Oh yes. If I did receive sexual gratification out of it, I would. But in my case, I wasn't. I feel that I wasn't. No.
Okay. Hold on.
Well, John.
Yeah.
How were you finally caught?
One of the fires I started, I left the scene, and about a mile away, I got pulled over by a police officer. And at the time, I was wearing a beard and everything, and arson investigators just did a general follow-up. You know, police saw this guy at 3 o'clock in the morning riding a bike down the road, and next morning I answered the door, and I'd been so drunk the night before I didn't realize that I'd singed my beard and mustache, and I answered the door with these arson investigators there.
Pretty telltale sign.
Yeah, yeah.
John, I'd like to know how old you were when you first started setting fires.
26.
You didn't set any fires as a youngster?
No.
Dr. Cochran, one of the things you always hear about arsonists is that they set the fire, and then they run to the telephone booth, call the fire department, and then stand there, wait for the fire trucks to arrive. Is that fairly typical, or is it a fabricated story that's been embellished over time?
Well, with these particular individuals, what happens is that they go through many different behavioral rehearsals. In other words, they do it time and time again. They know if they stay around certain scenes that they're going to get apprehended, and so they don't do that. They will tend to maybe come back, maybe the next day or the following week, to take a look at their handiwork, because that symbolizes something of power, of excitement for them. And I wanted to mention before that with these individuals, invariably, you go back through their records and you interview them like I have over a long period of time, you find out there's certain triggers that help trigger this. And often it's rejection, like, for example, from a female. Often it's loss of a job. It's something that's a major assault to the self-esteem system.
Yes, to the gentleman on the right. I live in the Lake City area where there have been several fires in the past few weeks, and the basic stuff we've been learning about fire safety hasn't seemed to have been enough. What extra tips and precautions can we take, because the next house that can be burnt could be my best friend's or mine, and I want to know what to do, and I want to know what I can do about it.
Tim, why don't you talk about that?
I can give you some things that you can try to do. It seems to me that you've started the right idea by keeping an eye on what's going on. The unusual thing, or the thing that always bothers me, is that people always see the arsonist, but they never put two and two together, if you will. People that watch their neighborhoods, watch their communities, watch their streets, you actually see the arsonist. And the more fires they set, the more blatant they become about it. They don't have to hide because they look like you or I. The arsonist doesn't have to have a beard, as John did, or have to not wear a tie or a suit. There's no picture of an arsonist that we could show you this is what they look like. Communities that have taken action against arsonists. And let me assure you that Seattle area is not the only one in the United States at this particular day that's going through this particular problem. I just left another part of the country that's doing the exact same thing. But what the communities do is they band together. They watch out for each other. They sort of go back the way things used to be, where you could watch out for your neighbor's property and watch out for your neighbor.
I have a question for John. Dr. Cochran related a rather dreary childhood. Was John's childhood like that?
Yeah, my folks, I was three in my family, but my mom was the only one taking care of us. We were minors without a dad. And he was a severe alcoholic, and apparently I inherited that myself, because my late teens and early adult life was completely involved around alcohol.
Let's take a moment here to meet some of the local fire people who have been trying to deal with the current rash of arson fires that we've had in this area. We have Chief Bob Hanson, who's the Seattle Fire Marshal. It's been 3 weeks since the last known arson fire has been reported. Your department got it all under control at this point, or are you willing to say that?
I don't think anybody ever has arson under control in a total way. We are working on the investigations in Lake City and View Ridge and Hawthorne Hills. We are making progress in the investigation. I'm satisfied that the progress is being made as fast as it can be at this point. I'm sure that your guests on the stage would tell you that this is a very slow process. A lot of things have to be done. They have to be done very carefully because while we would like to catch the arsonist, one of the things we don't want to do is accuse someone who is not guilty of setting the fire.
Okay, let's take a look at a map that's going to kind of give us an idea. And what we're looking at right now, Chief, is we're seeing how concentrated, how closely geographically related these fires are. Is that an indication of something? Why pick on one particular area to set all these fires? And how many fires are we talking about?
Well, we're talking about a large number of fires now. We've had 4 in View Ridge, and the 3 fires in Hawthorne Hills. We've had 10 or so in Lake City just recently, and 30-some fires out there since the beginning of the year. The work that has to be done on those fires is, as I said, proceeding. But there's not going to be any rapid progress in the next 30 days. This is not like a television show where the crime is committed and it's solved before the half-hour show is up.
More than one person possibly involved with this?
I believe that there's a very high probability that there's more than one person involved with it.
It's been reported that the fire department, Seattle Fire Department, may know who is responsible for this, but doesn't have enough evidence to charge the suspect. Is that an accurate portrayal?
There are a number of things that have to be done in the case before it's prepared for the prosecutor, and I'm not going to talk very much about the details.
I don't want you to jeopardize anything. Okay. Let's also introduce then Bill Mudd. He is the fire marshal for King County. You folks are dealing with your own problems.
Yes, assistant fire marshal.
Assistant fire marshal, excuse me. You just got a promotion. King County's arson fires are up 50%
Roughly
for this period this year.
50% the first 2 months of this year. Since '84, our fire investigation workload is up 72%, 3/4 of which has occurred in the last 9 months.
All right. Now, you've come out and said that you can no longer afford because of the manpower that's available.
And some investigations. We investigated 613 fires last year with 4 people, and we'll have in excess of 800 this year with the same 4 people. And it's simply a matter of logic that we cannot properly investigate that number of fires, so we will be cutting back.
Wouldn't, well, that just sounds unbelievable. Given the problem that this community is dealing with right now, it would seem that the political wisdom would be such that somewhere the appropriations could be found to hire some additional personnel, wouldn't you? And I'm not trying to put you on the spot with your people, but...
Well, I agree. I would like to see arson have a higher priority. I understand that government officials have hard choices to make, and I personally may not agree with them, but they aren't my choices to make. I'm faced with the job of investigating, trying to investigate to the best of our ability in a most aggressive investigation of all arsons. But we've done that for the last 8 years.
One quick footnote here. You're the one that caught John.
Yes.
Was it the singed beard that gave him away, or...?
No, I think John doesn't remember exactly that. He was talked to by a King County investigator a year or so before I caught him, and some Seattle investigators, but unfortunately not enough was developed at that time for him to actually be caught, and he was let go. I caught him along with another county investigator about a year or so later. He had stolen a car, and he had left one license plate, the original license plate on the front of the car, and had put a different license plate on the rear of the car, and that car was seen leaving the scene of a fire.
That's how they nailed you, John.
Yeah.
All right, when an arsonist does strike, these people lay their lives on the line to save us. We will hear from the firefighters when we come back. Stay with us. Town meeting, and we're dealing with arson tonight. Go ahead.
Yeah, this question would be directed at Bob Hanson. I currently live in an unincorporated area between Renton and Seattle. We're served by volunteer fire departments, and they seem to do a good job. But currently, they don't have a arson prevention program, to my knowledge, an extensive one. I was wondering if there's any plans to do anything about this situation.
Chief?
There's going to be some meetings, I think, between chiefs of fire departments of several jurisdictions in the area who will be talking about the arson problem. I'm sure some of that public education will be addressed in that program.
Yes, I have a question for Dr. Cochran. What is the most common causes for people to start fires?
The most common causes, well, let me just go back through the different categories. With pyromania, that ranks high, but also there's other kind of motivational factors, like, for example, revenge. We have cases in which a person, because of a lover's quarrel, will go ahead and ignite something. Often these are homosexuals who get into fights with each other. We have people who have had a row, say, at work with their boss, and they come back and they ignite the place. We have other situations where there's some kind of antagonism, like between a renter and the landlord, where a person goes back and burns down the apartment then. There are other categories, too, like, for example, to conceal a crime. There's at least 5 to 10% of the cases in which other crimes are perpetrated, and the arson is done to go ahead and to conceal that particular crime.
John? John?
Yeah.
That was your case, wasn't it? You, in addition to setting fires, used arson as a cover-up for additional crimes, didn't you?
On a few of them, yes.
Ken, I wanted to make a comment. The investigator basically has 7 categories that John and I work with on why people set fires. The number 1 reason is spite revenge. And our arsonist here, John, is very typical of a spite revenge arsonist. It's the most dangerous type of arsonist there is. That's the number 1 category. And all the little subcategories we talk about basically fit into that spite revenge.
Are arsonists ever totally rehabilitated? Or is it like drug abuse, alcoholism, something that you always have to be on guard against if they're a pyromaniac?
If they're a pyromaniac, I don't know of any absolute certain cure for these individuals, no more than I would for a sex offender. In fact, I've often made a parallel between them and sex offenders, because what happens is that many of the dynamics that we see are similar to what you find with compulsive sex offenders, and also so are their defenses. Like, for example, in terms of the typical kind of pyromaniac that you're dealing with, if you're trying to deal with them in a therapeutic manner, you'll always almost get denial initially, where they'll deny either the fire itself or certain aspects about their behavior or any kind of sexual arousal or sensual arousal or etc. Plus you get rationalizations and minimizations and projections where they project blame over onto other people.
I have a question for John. You mentioned that besides your relationships, you had a problem with your drinking. Did that influence you a great deal?
To me, alcohol was the main problem, but the relationships were too. Most men don't like being shunned.
I guess sitting here, I've had to ask myself a question. That is, we've almost painted a picture as if there's nothing we can do. We've almost decided that society or certain individuals within society are sick. And I guess my point is, and directed to Mr. May, as a homeowner, there is something I can do. Tell me, what can I do? What can I do to protect myself? I hear a lot about smoke alarms.
Well, I think your points are well taken. That's the question most people ask that aren't in the business. What can I do? You've done everything if you have smoke alarms to protect after the fact. Fire departments react after the fact. Our defeat comes when we have to put a fire out, and we didn't prevent the fire. That's the number one issue here, arson prevention. What you can do as a homeowner is what I briefly talked about, is that this person or these persons are someone that are sick, just as the rapist or the drug user. And they need to be recognized and need to be caught. But we only have 4 or 5 investigators working around the clock. You can help catch them. The people here, this community, can catch these arsonists. I've been to communities where the community has gone on an effort to catch and stop the arsonists and have done so. It's just simple observation. It's just simple. Instead of hiding, the public hides. You see something and you hide. Report this information. The smallest, minutest detail of something that you see in your neighborhood could be the trick that catches the arsonist. And that's what we need. Thank you.
Very recently, there was an arson fire that destroyed the library at Everett Community College, caused about $9 million worth of damage. Also during that fire, one of the Everett firefighters died, Gary Parks, excuse me. Doug McNall is the chief of the Everett Fire Department. Chief, you have to recognize that there is always the possibility that when your guys go out on a fire, there's the risk of somebody being hurt, somebody being killed. But when that fire is deliberately set, you know, certainly in the social sense, we're talking about murder.
That's correct. It is a murder. I'm not sure that arson makes you any more angry at losing the firefighter, to be honest with you. It's sort of like saying your brother got hit by a train or you're mad at the train company. I don't sense that at our department, that the people are angry because it was arson. I think the people are angry, they're frustrated because Gary died. And it's a very dangerous job. We all know it's a very dangerous job. We hurt people all the time. We don't, in this area, we haven't killed that many in the fire situation.
When you got there, when the fire call first got in and your people arrived, did you kind of have a feeling as soon as you got there that it was an arson because of the involvement?
I don't believe that any determinations were made at the initial attack of the fire. That I haven't talked to anybody, and I certainly haven't made any determinations in my mind when I arrived that this was obviously an arson fire or was an arson fire. It was a very big complex. There was a lot of fire involved. I don't think we made any predeterminations until we got into it. There was always a suspicion that, you know, that it could have been arson.
And the person or persons responsible for that has yet to be caught. That's got to emotionally play on the Everett Fire Department.
Well, the whole thing has been a real, you know, the thing that I liken it to probably for myself, and I think I sense that with a lot of people, I think most of us go back to when John Kennedy was killed, and I think that that's the type of emotional event that the Everett Fire Department suffered. The nation suffered it with John Kennedy, but I think that that's the type of thing. I mean, it goes right to the heart. And when you lose one of your own people in a situation like that, it's devastating, and we're not out of it yet.
And you've set up a reward, and you're actively participating in trying to find out who the person responsible for this is also.
ATF, Everett Fire, and Everett Police have formed a team that's very actively working this arson. The citizens of Everett and the city of Everett have posted a $32,500 reward for the conviction and apprehension, or the apprehension and the conviction of this person or persons. And we'll be working very hard. I think there'll be more money in the reward system, but I think I'm not sure that the money is going to be the motivator that's going to catch this person. I think that the person needs help, obviously, and we're going to work until we get them.
Okay, if you want information on that reward fund, we can give you a number here. It is 339-9160, and that's for the reward fund to try to find the arson person who was responsible for the Everett Community College fire. Tim, we talked about this a little bit before. Maybe we should touch on something else. How many people are killed in arson fires every year? We have 3 right here in our area.
Last year was approximately 670 people died as a result of arson fires. They already have them if you'll just participate.
Okay, Bill, some quick last comments from you here.
Yes, I think that we need a grassroots effort in our communities with block watch programs, Kiwanis, Chamber of Commerce, the Rotary, Elks Club. Groups like this should get together, form a coalition amongst themselves, and see to it that the neighborhoods are cleaned up and maintained arson safe. In other words, there's people out there that can't afford to have their trash hauled away, and there's people who are incapable physically of doing that job. And I know that out in the unincorporated parts of King County, there's no way that we, a 4-man and supervisor arson unit, can accomplish that.
All right. Well, we also need here then, and it's been alluded to all night, let's be more specific, the community's eyes and the community's ears have to be tuned into this thing. If you know something about arson, 1-800-55-ARSON. It is an arson hotline number. If you know something, use it. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll tell you what we've got coming up next week. Stay with us. Okay, next week on Town Meeting, the man who is most likely to commit a rape is not the one who hides behind a ski mask or lurks in a dark alley. The man most likely to rape someone is someone the victim knows. Now, next week on Town Meeting, we hear the disturbing stories of date rape and find out why so many men are getting away with this crime and why so many women are keeping their mouths shut. We would like to have you be in our audience. Give us a call at 443-4186 for your Town Meeting tickets. They are free. I want to thank everyone who participated in the program this evening. Thank you for watching. Take care. Have a good week.
Accommodations for guests on Town Meeting provided by the Stouffer Madison Hotel.
This is Dateline NBC. Tonight, an incredible drama. Solve the mystery that terrified a city. Who was it setting fire after fire?
Oh, Lord. This is a man who took everything from me but the breath in my body.
The most terrifying arsonist in U.S. history.
I mean, whose business would be next, whose home would be next, whose church would be next.
He taunted firefighters.
This individual knew how fire engines responded, knew how they were dispatched.
And he torched up to 5 buildings an hour.
5 more minutes, we'd have both been dead.
It triggered an unprecedented manhunt. And when you see how they caught him, you won't believe it. Tonight, for the first time, go inside the mind of a man branded America's worst serial arsonist.
Who's the star of this scene? No, it's not Tom Cruise. No, it's not Gene Hackman. It's the beer.
Grab a red stripe. Sloan, there's a way to solve your problem, and it's easier than you think. America Close-Up explains on NBC Nightly News tomorrow. From our studios in New York, here are Jane Pauley and Stone Phillips.
Good evening. Ask people what they fear most about violent crime, and they'll tell you it's facing a gun or a knife. But tonight, a story about another violent crime that can be the most devastating and terrifying of all. Arson. With one match or the flick of a lighter, someone you may never see can destroy everything you own and even cost you your life. In Seattle, it's a fear they know firsthand.
Month after month, a man called the worst serial arsonist in U.S. history was on the loose there. The hunt to bring him in became a public drama and one man's private torment. Tonight, a highly personal account of how the arsonist was captured. Listen to the clues in John Scott's report and see if you can figure it out.
It was an unthinkable crime.
I feel sick. I can't imagine why anybody would want to do anything like this.
Against unsuspecting victims.
5 more minutes, we'd have both been dead.
By an unseen arsonist.
Somebody just awful sick. Awful sick.
It was a time when no one in metropolitan Seattle could feel safe.
Total fear. Total fear. Because you never knew if you were going to be the next target. You just never knew.
In the end, the most unlikely of suspects went to jail, leaving the most unlikely of heroes to deal with a crushing truth. The first fires, August 6th of last year, drew little attention. On Seattle's north side, someone burned 3 homes under construction and unoccupied. 3 nights later, 3 more fires. But not just empty houses this time. The arsonist moved up to bigger targets, the community's churches.
It's like one of your worst nightmares. It was just a raging inferno. There were flames leaping higher than the sanctuary roof.
Pastor Rick Rouse's church was destroyed just hours before it would have been filled with Sunday worshipers.
The number of fires rose quickly, sometimes as many as 7 a night, and investigators had no real suspects. When the sun went down in Seattle, fears would rise.
In the first 7 weeks, the arsonist struck 24 times, and the stakes were getting higher. He wasn't just burning empty buildings by the end of September. Now he was striking occupied homes.
Nobody knew whose business would be next, whose home would be next, whose church would be next. And you could just sense that panic and that fear.
The arsonist's rampage was so widespread that federal, state, and local authorities joined forces to try to hunt him down.
There was a tremendous sense of frustration in the early months of the task force. We were working anywhere between 12 to 18 hours a day. We were working 7 days a week, and yet we were coming up empty.
Randy Litchfield of the Seattle Fire Department was one of the lead investigators.
With 100 plus of the best and brightest investigators in the Seattle area, why couldn't you catch this guy? We had no evidence. This guy was very good in that he didn't touch anything, he brought nothing in, took nothing out, and he was very short time over target.
A short time over target, meaning 20 seconds, maybe 30, to light a fire and leave. He often struck homes in middle-class neighborhoods, frequently starting his fires in carports. That's what he did to Jan Lindstrom just after midnight, October 15th.
There was a crash and a voice yelling, "Jan, get up, there's fire." Things just kept exploding. Flames were in the kitchen coming into the dining room. I mean, this wouldn't be happening.
Lindstrom stood barefoot in the street, watching the fire consume everything she owned.
If someone was angry enough at me that they had a blood grudge, at least I'd know why.
And Jan Lindstrom wouldn't be the only victim that night.
A neighbor came around the corner yelling, oh my God, it's on fire." And sure enough, they had another fire.
In little more than an hour, the arsonist set fires at 3 houses, a carport, and an office. 5 new crimes for the task force. Dane Wetzel, an agent of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, was the other lead investigator.
It was a tremendous amount of pressure. We felt confident at that point that someone was about to die.
Someone almost died at the Geddes Marina. It exploded in flames one night while 77-year-old Bill Geddes and his wife were in an upstairs apartment.
There's this big ball of fire coming, just like a freight train. Boomly, boomly, boom.
It was a terribly close call. Geddes saved his wife, lowering her by rope to the safety of the water. It was already too late to save his business. Each passing week brought new fires, but also new clues. Investigators began piecing together a profile of the man they hunted, and it had some peculiar elements.
He didn't want to get dirty. We didn't know why he was going into lighted carports instead of all the dark, dungy ones. He wanted to see where he was going. He didn't want to get his clothes dirty. He had nice clothes.
Occasionally, witnesses saw a well-dressed man getting in or out of his car a few moments before somebody's home or business burst into flames. Once, he was actually seen setting a fire, but nobody realized what he was doing because even his fire-setting style looked innocuous.
Normally you think of arson fires as being lit on the ground. Well, this individual, fires were set chest high. And that's unique. That's atypical. Within seconds we could tell if this was, our arsonist or not. Just fast in, fast out, chest high.
This guy is not spreading gasoline around the house.
No, he was just using a lighter, like a cigarette lighter.
The tiny flame of a cigarette lighter igniting destruction like this. Night after night after night. 30 miles north of Seattle, in Everett, Washington, George and Margaret Keller watched news reports with growing concern. The arsonist struck less than a mile from their house.
There was a terror that was all over Western Washington. There are 2 million people that were afraid at night, and justifiably so.
Right.
We were actually afraid because we thought
It was moving so close.
It was moving so close.
You were afraid?
Oh, I was afraid our home might be
Absolutely.
next. Because I didn't...
To frighten families like the Kellers, the attacks seemed random, but investigators believed they were far more calculated. They saw an organized mind behind the habit, someone whose targets had progressed from vacant buildings to houses of worship to homes where people slept. A criminal who deliberately chose the locations of his fires to taunt his pursuers, as he did on this night, September 14th.
Seattle engines went north to fight the fire up in the Shoreline District. Very shortly after that fire was underway, he then came back to an empty fire station, which was now vulnerable, and set a fire directly behind that station. We felt as sort of a gesture of contempt.
Who were you looking for?
We figured it was somebody with fire service background, knowledge, or participation, and then probably some type of a sales, occupation, which allowed him to travel and move.
But the arson task force wasn't sharing its theories with the public. So when George Keller went to work at the ad agency he owns, he didn't realize that his star account representative, Paul, closely fit the suspect profile.
A white male, approximately 30 plus years of age, driving a late model American mid-size 4-door sedan.
I was at that time providing Paul with the new 92 Chrysler product, medium blue, 4-door.
His dress was very formal as opposed to very informal. He would always wear slacks, white shirt, a suit.
He would wear the suit and the tie and, look really sharp.
This individual had some knowledge of the fire service, knew how fire engines, responded, knew how they were dispatched.
He knows the times their sirens blow. He knows the type of equipment in each one.
He knew what he was doing. He had very exacting standards for where he would go set a fire.
But at that point, there was no way for George Keller to know that what he knew about Paul was of any importance. The task force kept its information secret because it didn't want to tip off the arsonist. But no matter how much information it had about him, he always seemed to be one step ahead. He continued to terrorize the city until, in late January, the people who were hunting him decided it was time to gamble.
What we had to do was take the information that we had, that was our edge, and spend it. Make it public with the hopes of getting something back in return that was more valuable.
More than 5 months after the arson spree began, investigators released their psychological profile, along with artist sketches of the suspect. This one pried from the memory of an eyewitness under hypnosis.
I looked at that picture and said, that looks like Paul.
George Keller saw the picture and the profile in his morning paper.
And I underlined every single thing that applied to Paul. And what I was really, really looking for and hoping for was that single
the city until in late January, the people who were hunting him decided it was time to gamble.
What we had to do was take the information that we had, that was our edge, and spend it. make it public with the hopes of getting something back in return that was more valuable.
More than 5 months after the arson spree began, investigators released their psychological profile, along with artist sketches of the suspect. This one pried from the memory of an eyewitness under hypnosis.
I looked at that picture and said, that looks like Paul.
George Keller saw the picture and the profile in his morning paper.
And I underlined every single thing that applied to Paul. And what I was really looking for and hoping for was that single glaring psychological profile characteristic that did not apply to Paul.
The paper described a man who had a contentious relationship with his boss. Paul had nearly been fired by George. The arsonist was likely to be a first, last, or only child. Paul was the oldest of 3. The arsonist may have shown a change in his behavior in late July or early August, when some event in his life served as an emotional trigger for his fire setting. George knew Paul had just gone through personal bankruptcy.
Item by item, I went down the psychological profile, and every bit of it fit Paul. The only part of that profile that was inaccurate is it said he probably comes from a family that's a drunken, fist-fighting family.
And George Keller knows Paul's family well, knows them to be devoutly religious, law-abiding people who try to do right, who would be crushed if the arsonist turned out to be Paul. George knows all this because Paul, the account executive, his employee, is also Paul Keller, his oldest son.
So for George Keller, the clues seem to point to his son, Paul. When we come back, would the father confront his son or go to the police? And later you'll hear from the man who set the fires.
Consider the situation. For months, an arsonist has been setting horribly destructive fires. A massive manhunt is underway. Imagine how you would feel if you thought your son was committing such monstrous crimes. As George Keller wondered, he agonized over what his next step should be.
For nearly half a year, the Seattle area lived in fear of the arsonist who could strike anyone, anytime. No one knew who he was, but the case was about to break. George Keller remembers opening his newspaper the morning of January 28th.
And I have to tell you that my heart just got heavier by the minute.
He remembers staring at the front page, hoping that the sketch of the arsonist was somehow not the face of his son, Paul. That same day, the sketch was also on the mind of another member of the Keller family. Ben Keller is Paul's younger brother. He'd seen the picture on television, along with something else that made him suspicious. A report that a fire in the little town of Cle Elum last November was now being attributed to the arsonist.
So I called Ruth at the office the next day and said, take a gander at Paul's gas slips and, see where he was.
His sister Ruth worked with Paul at their father's ad agency.
You saw he was in the neighborhood.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. It said Cleveland right there on the gas slip, so.
She came over to my desk early in the afternoon and she said, Dad, we've got 2 gas slips on November 17th where Paul is in eastern Washington in Cle Elum, and he's only a block and a half from where one of the fires were.
So that day it was no real surprise for any of you. You were each independently coming to the same conclusion.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It was.
Very reluctantly.
Yeah.
You, especially a family member, you give, untold benefits of the doubt.
Right.
He may look the same, may do this the same, may have 50 of the same characteristics of this guy they're talking about, but it's not him, So you kind of have to go through that process of, let's face the facts here.
Now, with the gas slips as hard evidence, the Kellers had to face the anguishing possibility that the unknown arsonist was the son and brother they loved. George Keller had to do something.
You all knew that you were about to go
That's
in
right.
your own son.
Oh. I don't know how you can put into words what that's like.
You're still hoping. Well, maybe it isn't, but oh man, it wasn't looking good.
I felt that I did not have a choice. If it's Paul, and I don't go to the task force, and he sets one other fire, and somebody dies or is injured, it's my fault. So I didn't have a choice. So at that very moment, I went to the arson task force.
Well, when George Keller came in, it wasn't like anything that we had prepared ourselves for at all.
The investigators always expected, at the end of their search, to come face to face with a cunning and evil arsonist. They were not expecting to meet someone like George Keller.
George was coming in to maybe make the ultimate sacrifice. He was giving up his eldest son.
We had a father who is a good man, just a tremendous individual, walk in with his heart in his hands and go, I think it's my son. I think it's my boy.
I said, I hope and pray with all my heart that I am 100% wrong. But it wasn't.
Everything he said fit. And it just didn't fit sort of. It fit absolutely like machine parts. It was perfect.
What did he tell you?
So well. He told us his son's age, his occupation, that he traveled, his character, his mannerisms. We knew him from the profile. And it fit perfectly like a glove. It was tailored to fit Paul Keller.
I don't have a word that's bad enough to describe. There was a lot of pain that day. A lot of pain since. I just hated to do that. But I had an obligation, a responsibility. That's why I did it.
What does that have to do with this? The investigators didn't have the evidence they needed to make an arrest, but they knew where they could get it, from the Kellers. The family cooperated and handed over Paul's business files, even though they knew the information they were providing could put him in prison for years.
And every hour of every day, the pressure increased. And every hour of every day, there was more and more evidence that what we had brought to the task force was in fact true.
Paul's cellular phone records, for instance, revealed a startling pattern. Dates and times showing that when many of the fires broke out, Paul was very close by, making calls on his car phone.
He was a prolific cellular phone user. And what that did is that gave us a geographic footprint of where this guy was at any given hour of any given day.
For 8 grueling days, task force members dug. Through every aspect of Paul Keller's life, they had to build a case, and they had to trust Paul's family not to let something slip that might cause him to run.
And I've got my copy here. So the hardest of all was that Paul, in his working with us, his desk is only 10 feet from mine. And we couldn't tell Paul anything. We knew a very horrible secret. We knew of an impending, terrible change in Paul's life, and there was nothing we can do.
After you turned in your own son, you had to go back to work with him,
Right.
share your family life with him, and pretend that nothing was wrong.
Right.
That's right.
That's right.
It was literally like hell. I mean, it was.
We could just feel his tension mounting because I think Paul was sensing on down closer, at least to the end of the week, that something was going on. He wasn't sensing it from us,
No.
but he was sensing that maybe somebody was on his trail.
In fact, the investigators were trying to follow Paul's car and found themselves chasing him down these highways, often at speeds of more than 100 miles an hour.
He drove like a maniac, very, very fast, very radical. We had 6 cars on him at different times and literally could not stay with him.
Their fear, if Paul Keller was the arsonist, all he needed was 30 seconds alone to light another fire and terrify another family. On Thursday night, February 4th, the Kellers gathered at this restaurant for a family dinner. It had been a week since George had gone to the task force, and even Paul seemed to sense something was about to happen.
Paul cried through the whole dinner. So when the dinner was over, we're a family. We hug a lot. But what was struck us as very unusual is when both his mother and I, when Paul gave us each a hug, he just held on.
Mm-hmm, he did. But he was so extra clinging that night, like he didn't want to let go.
I felt a lot like it was like attending the Last Supper.
Saturday morning, February 6th, 6:19 a.m. The most wanted man in Washington state, the guy suspected of terrorizing millions of people, sat in his living room looking befuddled, fumbling for his tennis shoes and politely chatting with those who had come to capture him. Investigators now thought they could tie Paul Keller to more than 100 arson fires, but their case was not airtight. They desperately hoped he would confess.
You were so bubbly and bouncy, you know, you could have made a sales call. And I had this horrible pit in my stomach thinking, he's too cool. He's not going to give us anything. He's going to beat us.
But the investigators still had one trump card. When they took Paul to the task force headquarters that morning, sitting there waiting was George Keller. The anguished father had one more role to play in the case against his son.
I did not tell Paul, you confessed to these fires. I did not. I said the time to tell the truth is now. This is the one time in life that you have to tell the truth.
It was 6 months to the day since the unknown arsonist lit his first fires in Seattle. For 6 months he had cleverly eluded capture. Now the prime suspect sat facing his pursuers. Was he also clever enough to deny them the confession they wanted? Paul Keller began to speak. His first words, I've been waiting.
When we come back, can Paul Keller frustrate investigators one more time?
Here again is Stone Phillips. After 6 months of eluding police, Paul Keller had been turned in by his own father. But would he confess? And if he did, would he reveal anything to authorities that would help them better understand the mind of the serial arsonist? Once again, here's John Scott.
I'm not a criminal. I just want you guys to know that I'm not a bad guy. I have a good mouth.
If he denied everything, Paul Keller could frustrate an investigation already 6 months old. Dane Wetzel of the Arson Task Force was on edge.
The evidence we did have was substantial, but it tended more to be circumstantial, and we needed, or we wanted, in order to solidify the case, of confession.
And so, with George Keller's help, they set out to try to get Paul to talk.
George wrapped his arms around him, he patted him on the back several times, and he repeatedly said with George's mouth very close to Paul's ear, "Son, they know everything. They know everything. It's over. It's over."
During the next few hours, the interviewers would get a glimpse inside the mind of Paul Keller.
Am I going to be over there? Am I going to be on my own? I've never done anything wrong.
And sitting there, he seemed amiable enough, nothing at all like a serial arsonist.
I'm like a bad thing to me because it's not something that I would do. I mean, I'm a proponent of the fire.
Just a solid citizen worried that his arrest was potentially embarrassing.
Publicly, I have some concerns also, and that is that I'm a respected good guy.
So they treated him with respect, even flattered him, instilled him with pride in talking.
So the fire, you guys don't think I'm you guys, no, I mean, I don't know. You are absolutely fascinating to accomplish. We respect you for what you've been able to do here. Well, I knew these guys were caught out of fail. I know you guys are thrilled with everything. And I am thrilled that you can say this is on glass.
He sat back, I believe, crossed his arms in sort of a protective gesture, and stated, "Yeah, I set the fires, but I didn't set all of them."
Their 6-month search was over. The arsonist was caught.
Yeah, I'll tell you one thing. When it comes to the house, I think they were all that simple and that fast. It was just a no-brainer, and it was a no-reason.
But even after he confessed to setting dozens of fires, he didn't seem to comprehend the seriousness of what he'd done.
But, you know, I'm not the guy that they could be putting in jail and stock market insurance or something. He's not going to make a lot of sense because my life's a happy place. You don't even know why I got into it in the first place. I really can't say.
There are many things about Paul Keller that are difficult to explain. He went to church, even sang in the church choir, and yet he burned churches. He liked visiting old people, yet he burned homes belonging to the elderly. His family thought he never touched liquor, yet he was going to bars and drinking huge amounts almost every night. He was earning a $75,000 salary, but had to declare bankruptcy in part because he spent so much of his money on his vices, like liquor, marijuana, and massage parlors. There were two Paul Kellers.
Yes. That's the conclusion that my wife and I come to. And that is that the Paul that we knew was one Paul. The Paul that has done all these monstrous other things is a second Paul that we were unaware of.
From the beginning, Paul said alcohol is what triggered his arson spree.
I absolutely looked into oh yeah, but I also understand that the reasons that I did it were, I was smashed every time.
He blamed everything on alcohol.
Blamed it on alcohol.
Do you buy that?
Not a bit. He kept saying over and over again, you know, I would like to help you with this, but I just can't remember. You know, I was drunk at the time. But yet, every time we discussed a particular fire, and then later on in the night, there's fire. That's correct.
Well, a little bit, but I can see exactly what I did.
Investigators took Paul to dozens of places he burned.
Do this fire?
Yes, I did.
Like Trinity Lutheran, the church pastor Rick Rouse saw in flames just hours before Sunday services. A search of Paul's apartment turned up a Bic lighter and his unusual collection, lights and sirens from fire trucks, plus emergency scanners. And inside the trunk of his car, a fireman's jacket.
We'll go see if there's a name on it.
In a Seattle documentary about his case, Paul spoke about what began.
It was recently annexed into the city of Everett, and I found that that was a very safe place, a place where I could trust the people.
As he grew older, his fascination with the fire service grew more intense. He'd ride his bike to fire scenes. His parents didn't object.
He wanted to watch these firemen help somebody else. That's how we saw it.
Yeah. It seemed like an outlet for his energy, and Paul had too much. His family says he was a difficult child, combative with his parents, abusive toward his siblings.
If he punched me in the nose, he would wonder why I got upset. But if I punched him in the nose, then he would be, enraged.
At age 9, Paul was caught setting a fire that did superficial damage to this empty home in his neighborhood. It was about that same time, his parents say, a doctor diagnosed the reason for his behavior. Paul was hyperactive.
We said, well, what do we do? And he said, well, you're just going to have to be long-suffering parents.
As an adult, Paul applied for a job as a firefighter, but he wasn't chosen. Still, he hung around firehouses in awe of the shiny equipment and those who used it.
They're good guys. And one of the things that I've always respected about them is there is no hesitation. When the bell hits, they go.
And Paul would go after them. He took pictures by the thousands of fires, fire trucks, and emergency equipment. 2 of his photos even made it into the official history book of the Everett Fire Department. After his arson spree, Paul said this to those who had to extinguish the fires he set.
I would say how sorry I am to have let them down as friends, to have put them at risk. I imagine some of those fires were pretty darn good drills for him.
Paul claims his interest in firefighting had nothing to do with his becoming an arsonist.
It's not an interest in fires, and I want to make that very clear. My interest has been and always will be the history of the service itself. If half of Everett is burning down, the reason that I might be there is to take some pictures of what trucks might show up.
But Paul also took pictures at some of the fires he set, like this one of the Vancouver Door Company, and this photo he snapped as the Geddes Marina burned. Investigators say they suspect Paul didn't just set fires in his home state.
We found in Paul's records, in his photographs that we seized from his apartment, photographs of fires in California, Nevada, Hawaii, Mexico, different places where the family would go on vacation. I don't know how many fires you've personally discovered in your life. Probably not too many. Paul was discovering fires all the time and taking pictures of them. Not only taking pictures of them, but he would take pictures of the first-in arriving fire engines.
You're a little suspicious.
I'm a little suspicious.
The crimes of first-degree arson in counts 27.
Just weeks after Paul's arrest, he went to court, pleading guilty to one arson count after another.
Mr. Keller, as to count 18, first-degree arson, what is your plea?
Guilty.
The 75 fires he admits setting caused no deaths, although one firefighter was badly injured. The property damage, an estimated $22 million. So the only question remaining, what kind of punishment would Paul receive? There was a shock ahead for the Keller family, and it had nothing to do with the judge's decision. Even though George Keller had turned his son over to arson investigators, that didn't mean he had abandoned him. Immediately after Paul's arrest, George went to work on his son's behalf. He began looking for the reason behind Paul's behavioral problems. In a forgotten file at the hospital where Paul was born, George uncovered medical records showing that just after Paul's birth, he lost a lot of blood when nobody noticed his umbilical cord was leaking. And no one in the family knew about it until George found the document the day before this interview.
At 7:10, it says, baby became dusky, cord appears to be losing. We've had 27 years of pain because those bastards never had the courage to tell us what happened when our son was born. And the pain not just for us, but our son, who's now arrested as a serial arsonist. You know, my God, the outrageousness of this is just more than I can bear. Oh, Lord. Lord.
It is not an excuse for Paul's behavior, the Kellers say, but it might be an explanation, and they hoped the judge would consider it when imposing sentence. Paul faced the possibility of a 75-year prison term. Too severe, he said.
And I thought, what is fair? I can't say what I think is fair. I would say, 5 years or 10 years with a third off for good time and plenty of counseling and therapy along the way.
But the judge didn't agree and didn't accept any of his excuses.
It's not the fault of the doctor or hospital at your birth. And it's not the fault of alcohol or marijuana either. You and you alone are responsible for the fires, no one else. I will sentence you to the exceptional sentence of 75 years.
Paul Keller is now serving that 75-year term in a state prison. Those who know him best say he still does not fully comprehend how much damage he did, how much pain he caused.
Well, I think Paul knows he's set 75 fires, but I don't think he's got the big picture as to how bad it is to set 75 fires. During the course of this thing, on the one hand, Paul would face all these life sentences, and on the other hand, he would be asking about his speeding tickets. Are they going to be dismissed as part of the plea bargain?
I would make one life in 50 years. We think you would too, you would. Because you got practical experience.
I asked him, are you sorry? Well, he said, of course, Dad, I'm sorry. And he said, I cry a lot. But I don't feel that I have understood from him yet the immense suffering that is still left behind.
Lord, I need your healing. So the Kellers were left to try to make sense of Paul's crimes. They attended a service of healing at the site of one of their son's first and most costly fires, Trinity Lutheran Church.
Why? Why me? Why my son? Why my family? Why the pain against my Christian brothers and sisters? Why so many victims?
I certainly did let him down. And he's never let me down. Even in turning me in, he's never let me down. I feel terrible because, here I sit and I can look up at my office. And there was love in that office.
That was when Paul was still in the county jail, when his father could look out his office window and see the place where his son was being held. George and Margaret Keller take comfort in their faith. They say prayer has sustained them through the pain of their son's arrest and imprisonment.
My wish in my lifetime is that I'm 52, and that is that before I'm dead and gone, I'd like to meet my son when he comes out.
Even with time off for good behavior, Paul Keller is not expected to be released from prison for 50 years. He would be 77. His father, 102.